Well, good evening, and thank you for coming to this fireside chat on creative construction or destruction, disruptive technologies and business model in media. Now, I must say, thank you for especially the SPLF students for being here, all of the faculty and colleagues, PhD students too that I see. A lot of this is based on things that we've been talking about in class on how to be the CEO of Me, Inc., and now We, Inc., the forthcoming book that I'm about to write, where really one of the main themes is to reject the versus mindset and accept a trader's mindset. And so even in the phrase creative destruction, for instance, there is an implied versus. You've got creation, but then you have to deal with destruction. And, as I have taught innovation and entrepreneurship, researched it, interacted with people who are the innovators and the entrepreneurs, one theme that has stood up for me more and more is that even the way we think about innovators and entrepreneurs in terms of their intent is perhaps misunderstood. Because it's almost assumed that people who are innovating are always looking to destroy things. But in contrast, what I see is a different mindset and a confusion between intent versus consequence. Intent that I have observed in entrepreneurs such as Oscar and Naren, and we're going to come to them in just a second, is much more about building. They don't start getting up in the morning saying, what am I going to destroy today? What is it that I'm going to annihilate? Instead, what they're looking at is, what problems do I want to solve? Why are these the problems that I want to be spending every waking moment of my life? What is it that I seek to create and build? What solutions do I care about? So today, we're going to be talking to two of these entrepreneurs, these builders, both of whom have quietly, and it often starts very quietly, been building and building for several years. And in doing so, they have disrupted what we know in terms of traditional media. So we've got hybrid publishing as an alternative to traditional publishing. And Naren will be talking about his experiences in building and hence disrupting. We've got podcasting as disruptive to traditional TV and other sources where we get content. And Oscar will be talking to us about how he has spent the last several years of his life building out Podville Media. So, with that, let me go ahead and introduce them just very briefly, and then let's get the conversation started, right? So Naren Aryal is the CEO of Amplify Publishing Group. He has launched this company in 2003 and grew it to being one of the leading hybrid publishing organizations. In fact, you just merged with the other leading one. So now you are the CEO of the leading hybrid publishing model.
That's right.
His work has helped redefine the relationship between authors and publishers by creating models where both sides co-create value. And he also brings a very distinctive perspective, having had his previous life as an attorney, helping technology companies, a corporate attorney, advising technology companies. Oscar is the CEO and co-founder, along with Charlie Brinke here, of Podville Media, and has been a pioneer in podcasting since 2005. He helped build a company that has produced award-winning podcasts for nonprofits, media brands, public figures, and large organizations. And in fact, his experience gives him a front row seat on how podcasting has transformed media. And we'll be talking a little bit more about how they continue to build and renew themselves as they are going through their journey. Now, I'll say personally, this is especially special for me because as I am embarking on my next chapter, which is both writing a book and getting into podcasting, these are my two trade partners. And so you're looking at a consumer of the value that they've created even as we speak. So before I start, Naren, any opening remarks? And then we can dig right into some Q&A, and then I'll also let Oscar say a few things.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Oscar. Wonderful to share this panel with you. So I just celebrated 23 years in business, and I got my start, a little background story. I was a lawyer previously, and I got my start because I was looking to publish a book, and I went to the big traditional houses and said, hey, I got this wonderful book idea. What about, you're a publisher, I'm an author, let's work together. And what I found quickly is it's not quite how it works. The traditional houses, and they produce wonderful books, but there's a regimented system. And that system includes finding an agent and pitching traditional houses, and all that takes time, and it's not for everybody. And so my initial book, happened to be a children's book. It was a children's book about my university's mascot. I went to Virginia Tech. No booze here, please. And my daughter, who's 3 at the time, wanted a children's book starring the Hokie Bird. And so I got a license from the university, published this book called Hello, Hokie Bird. And what I found is there was a real market need, a niche that needed to be filled, that the big houses they couldn't see it because it just wasn't, it was one title or one project. It didn't rise to their level of what they were looking for. But what we found is there was a market opportunity at the intersection of children's literature and licensed sports content. And we published Hello, Hokie Bird. And then soon we published Hello, Testudo. And 350 other university licensed books. We got a license for Major League Baseball, NFL teams, and that was 1.0 of my business. And what's happened since then, what I really enjoy, I do enjoy children's books, I should say that, but what I really enjoy is business, thought leadership, self-help, and that's what Amplify has really grown to. That's been our niche focus as of the last 5-6 years. And so in that arena, thought leadership and business type books, there just became a need to fill a space between traditional publishing on one hand and self-publishing on the other. And the hybrid approach is what sort of grew from that. And we're one of the pioneers in that space. And we'll talk a lot more about it, what it means and the value propositions for the authors and the publishers. But that's a little introduction of who I am and how I got here. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, my name is Oscar Zeballos, and I first have to say that the University of Maryland and the Robert H. Smith School have a very special place in my heart, as I actually came to this university and this school later in life as part of the executive MBA program. And it's a TERP trifecta is what I like to call it, as podcasting, when I first got involved, was viewed much like Dungeons and Dragons years ago, when I would explain to people, hey, I think there's something special happening here, or we're democratizing what broadcasting is, and it's on demand, it's direct to your phone. A lot of people they'd humor me at dinner parties, and then they probably would move on with their life because I wasn't interesting enough. But I felt in my gut that we had something special. And the transition to video and audio and my partnership with Charlie Burney, who's here today, really opened up the opportunity to scale what was a need as a broadcaster. My background is in broadcasting. I was a talk show host for CBS Radio for the better part of a decade. And as the 2008 recession came around, I was turning 31, and I come from an immigrant family. I'm the youngest of 3. Every one of my siblings are doctors. My father's a doctor. And I remember my mom at every turn of a station format flip or our agent calling us and saying, hey, you won't believe what happened. She would always say, now you can go to law school. Now you can go to law school. And at that point, at 31, I wasn't considering law school, but it was survival mode. And I really do believe a lot of these businesses, your passion, or even if you feel like you can change an industry, comes from your need first. How can we do this? How can I take what we've built and not go to law school, no disrespect, but build a media firm and And what ended up happening was I was able to launch a handful of networks, start a software company that involved podcasting. But what really changed everything was this university, this school, where I have a good friend of ours and a business partner. His name is Dominic Foxworth. He's on ESPN now. He's a UMD alum. And we met before he went into the league. And he came back as he finished his tenure as NFLPA president. And I said, do you mind stopping by? You're in between your first and second year at Harvard Business School. I've built something and we're profitable, but I don't understand how much we're making per download. It's probably important in business. And he came by and he said, how did you build this? And I said, YouTube? And he said, no, the engineering side of this. And I said, oh, well, I learned as a young broadcaster. And not to bore you, but within 2 hours, he had figured out how much we were making per download. I was shocked. I said, how did you do this? He said, if you can build, you did the hard part. This is just math. You need to go back to business school. And I said, well, I'm 37. Why would I ever go back to business school? He said, Oscar, I know you to be a hard worker, but your first mover advantage is going to go away because at that point, there was this podcast called Serial that was coming out. And once the big networks and all the media firms find out that this is viable, you won't be able to compete. So you need to go to business school. You need to find the right individuals to trade with. I met Charlie there. And the history writes itself. Today, I got off the phone with one of our other clients, another Terp, and a friend. I say that, yeah, I think he's a friend now, 2 years, Mr. Scott Van Pelt. And the idea that we've been able to work with the not just the cream of the crop, but the classiest, the most professional, the best of the best, and bring their shows, not just, frankly, from podcasting to this top caliber program, but from podcasting to television shows, the shows that we shoot along with our partners at Ventana Productions. And thank you for the team for being here today. Those shows are on television now. We filmed them as radio and television shows, and we did that for years, and everybody thought we were crazy until we got the call. So I feel lucky to be here. I'm fortunate to be here, but at the end of the day, this is the future. And by the show of empty seats, I'm hoping it's the weather, because if those empty seats are a reflection of if what we believe AI is going to do with media or how we're going to use it, there's going to be some hard lessons learned. And I can't wait to talk about that. But I do believe the future is bright. And we'll have some examples of how you all can leverage this technology and the AI for good and not evil. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So I want to unpack a lot of what the both of you said, because there was a lot in there, and I just want to draw out some themes. So first off, one of the things that struck me as I was listening to both of you is we talk about how innovation and entrepreneurship actually comes because you look around in your world, the places you go, the things you do, the people that you meet, and you see problems. And what I heard from both of you is that you are, in fact, the quintessential user entrepreneur. For you, the unmet need was personal. You wanted to write a children's book, and you found that the existing models didn't really fit it. You were part of the industry, and you found that the industry wasn't doing right, both in terms of incorporating new technologies and new business models, new venues through which creativity could be done, but also your own personal needs weren't also being met, and you saw a better way. And we'll come to the business school aspect. Oscar was one of my best students too, I must say. And there are a lot of good executive MBA students here, so he's in good company there when he's talking about it. But let's just peel the onion a little bit out here and talk about how you built, not starting with disruption. Clearly, there was an unmet need. You saw problems in there. So Naren, when you first launched Amplify, And you talked about the fact that you yourself didn't see this need being well met. But you didn't come up saying, oh, I'm going to disrupt traditional publishing right from the point. So what problems did you perceive that you needed to solve?
Yeah. So one thing that was clear is the publishing was pretty closed off to about 95% of the authors out there. The traditional houses, they look at authors with massive platforms, and a lot of times the content alone just doesn't matter. And I felt like there ought to be a better system where content matters, and the ability to market and grow your platform counts for something, as opposed to have already hit a certain benchmark in platform. And so, that was the real push. And I was talking to a lot of authors, and these are really smart people with a lot of intelligent messages and things to say. And I felt like they needed a vehicle to get their works out there in a high quality way, always high quality, and to own some of their intellectual property as well. Because that's one of the things is you may have heard when you publish with the large traditional houses, you got to fight for every bit of your IP. And the people that we work with are keynote speakers, are consultants, and their IP is everything. And so just putting that system together that would allow them to come to market with high quality content, the same distribution, better marketing, ownership of IP. Nobody was doing it, and nobody was doing it at scale. And so that just became an obvious reason to go into this.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you were also looking to democratize access to the publishing world for people who had something to say.
That's right. One caveat, though, right about 20 years ago, Amazon came out with their Kindle, which was the ultimate democratization of a pathway to publishing. And what happened is the floodgates of content, particularly in the book format, were flung open, which was a great thing. Everybody could be out there and publishing. You have a book, we could get you out there tonight, right? But what that also created is a bunch of content. And, frankly, much of it wasn't great, right? And so there just had to be a third path that wasn't the pure self-publishing, that wasn't traditional publishing, something in the middle where content, the quality of content was paramount, and providing the same access and the marketing opportunities that the traditional houses provided. So that's where we sort of landed, and that's what I've been working pretty hard to do over the last 20 years.
So, Oscar, podcasting is often described as a very disruptive medium. But when you got deeply involved in it, and you already alluded to this, nobody knew what it was, right? YouTube, and you were reverse engineering a lot of these things. What was the problem that you were looking to solve for creators, brands, audience?
Well, it's actually, the answer is twofold. My initial problem, and that's why in 2005, that's when did you first publish your first podcast? And for, anyone that's sub 30, you're probably not going to remember this, but there used to be something called just an iPod, and you'd have to plug it into your computer, and you'd have to connect to the internet and then download your songs or anything you'd like onto the computer first, and then download it onto your iPod. I know that sounds terrible, but we thought that was the future, and it was revolutionary at the time. I had a friend who worked in a skiff. I was on the radio during middays, and he wanted to be able to listen to the show from the night before, the day before, in the skiff. So he said, there's something called a podcast. Will you ask CBS Radio to upload your show? And I said, there's no way they're going to let us do that. And he said, just ask. So I walk in, and they told me to write an email to New York. They never responded. I wrote another one a month later, never responded. And then finally, I just uploaded it. And no one ever asked. And so technically, we were the first talk show on Apple Podcasts, then called iTunes. And as we moved across the country from market to market to market, that's just what happens in radio. We were getting calls from Baltimore, DC, Arizona, and we didn't understand why people were finding us. And they're like, oh, I listened to the podcast. And I said, you actually listen to this? So we built this national audience before there was internet radio. And so the power of the technology was very evident to us. Where it became mature and a lifeline for us was when most of the stations that were talk stations for CBS radio, which were pretty expensive to run, turned into sports stations. And it logically and economically made sense. Let's sell the top 10 markets to Geico, and that's all we have to do. We don't need sales teams in every market. And that meant that our talk show, was either getting shelved or maybe we'd find a home somewhere else. And at that point I said, well, the podcasting had completely revolutionized itself. And the year prior to us coming back to DC, we were in a feeder market for Los Angeles in Phoenix, Arizona. And I watched in real time Adam Carolla take his show, he was our morning show, and put it online. What does that remove? That removes an FCC license, that removes a brick and mortar, a sales team. You could just go direct. And my world in broadcasting quickly turned into a world of how can I help these early gatekeepers thrive? So I'm on the phone with Mark Maron, literally cold calling him saying, I think there's an advertising opportunity here. I still have the email from Joe Rogan when I write Joe Rogan. And I said, hey, I think there's an opportunity here. He said, that sounds great. No one's really into this, but I have a different product that I have ownership in. And to his credit, he owned a piece of the product, and that's all he wanted to promote. At that point, it was an adult toy, and things have changed since then. But I was able to get to Maron's side of the business. I was able to get into the Nerdist, Chris Hardwick, if you remember him. He had a great podcast. So all of these big early podcasters, I was on both sides, not just on the creative side, but on the sales side. So when our number got called, and I wasn't on I was on the talent side. When our number got called and they were like, look, it's a great run. We'll figure out something. This is our agent. And I know when our agent said, that means I have to find another gig, figure that out. I said, let's see what podcasting can do. And our entire crew thought we were nuts, really me. As I said, no to other deals, less money. But before you knew it, what was a 5-hour, 5-day-a-week show became yielding dollar for dollar. We were working 79 minutes, taping it, publishing it, and making more than we were making with our CBS radio contract because of the direct consumer aspect of it and on demand. And the transition to video is just, it's still early. It's still happening. For those of you that have kids, is there ever a time that they're watching the big screen in front of you and not the little screen? Like, I will watch my 17, 18-year-old nephews, and they're watching this, and they have 85 screens, but they're watching this. The phone, is the new television. And in the marketing world, in the publishing world, that's direct to consumer. So when you ask why and how, it was a lot of hard work. It to the point there wasn't enough compute or power on a USB, like a tower that you would get from Micro Center, to push enough for 4 webcams, because that's how we built our first rig. We were creating it in real time. That's why I say it's Dungeons and Dragons. Like people are like, are you guys making any money doing this? But indeed we were, and it really allowed us to compound and drive. And what I learned in Secretary Professor Falconder's class, thank you for joining us, was key. That he said, free cash flow is king. And at that time, I didn't realize how blessed we were in our early cycles, because we were winning. And as you know, as an entrepreneur, you don't always win. There are times where you're like, what happened to that free cash flow? But I will say that with the right partners and the right team, and I should address my beautiful wife that's here, that works with us and helped build this. Shannon, please stand up. And without her, these wins aren't wins. So
we're going to get to partners in just a second. But, what was also interesting to me is that both of you, so you talked about Kindle, again, being the technology medium. You talked about YouTube. Mm-hmm. I heard one theme out here, and that was very much, so both of you had, all of a sudden, you no longer had the stranglehold on access on both sides, on the talent side as well as on the consumer side. And so what you were really doing, both of you, were creating platforms for superior content for people to read or for to watch.
Yes.
And also for talent to be able to grow in there. You talked a lot about the market insights and also how Dominique helped you think about, well, what's the business model? We'll get to that in a second. What market insights were you drawing upon, Naren, as you were thinking about, this is an unmet need, but I'm a corporate attorney, so, where were your insights coming from?
So what quickly became apparent is when we were working with keynote speakers, thought leaders, business executives, their measure of success for a publishing project wasn't limited to the units of books sold. Whereas if you ask HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, they have one metric. How many books did this title sell? All their decisions are driven by that one metric. And the interesting thing is, they succeed sometimes, they fail sometimes. Whereas the class of author that we typically work with, who doesn't want to sell a bunch of books? We've had books on the New York Times list before, USA Today, all the lists. But most of our authors, their measure of success is multi-pronged. They want to sell books. They want to get visibility. They want to sell more keynotes. They want to grow their podcast following. They want to sell consulting gigs. I had one person, a year after we put his book out, he told me, hey, you know what? Publishing that book was the best thing I ever did. I said, why? Tell me. He said, because I knew his numbers, he sold 5,000 copies, which is a respectable number. He said, that book enabled me to sell my company. And so the ROI is multifaceted for most of the people that we work with, whereas the large traditional houses, they care about one thing, units sold, and that alone does not make a successful book project for most people. And I'll even take that further. Amazon, their one and only metric is what? The same. How many copies can they sell? And so we'll get to direct to consumer. We were seeing a lot more direct to consumer as well, because on Amazon, Amazon keeps data of the buyer. And, there's an opportunity to get that data, which is more important than actually selling the book. And platforms like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, they don't give you that access. So I guess there are a couple problems that we're addressing.
Very good. So let's get to another theme that both of you were talking about, right? And that is, of course, and I'm still going to stay with the building theme, and then we'll come to the disruptive theme in just a second. But on the building theme, and you already alluded to the fact that, Dominique was an early person that was almost a mentor to you, saying you need to go to business school. I'm so glad he did that, because otherwise you and I wouldn't know that. You talked about Charlie, you talked about Shannon. So other people, how did you take your own personal conviction and the people in your life, and how did you go about building the organization of what is today Podville Media? So the question that I guess I'm asking is, at what point in time did this become from a twinkle in your eye to a potential dream, to making it a reality, convincing other people to also join? And then how did you go about choosing who are the people and what capabilities you needed to build in this organization that was more than Oscar?
So this is going to sound like, honestly, a billboard for the Robert H. Smith School of Business. But as I was interviewing to be accepted for the program, I quickly, was accepted at Georgetown, George Washington. We were blessed enough to live 2 blocks from, and we still have a home, 2 blocks from the Georgetown University campus. I could have walked there. Driving here from Georgetown, as you all know, is not necessarily something you want to do at 6 a.m. on a Saturday or Sunday morning or whenever the class may be. I would have rather walked. The challenge that Maryland offered me was not an immediate yes. They asked me thoughtfully what my weakness was. And anybody can ask you that. You're like, oh, and they drilled that into me. And they finally got it out of me where I was not particular or thoughtful or very discerning on the people I traded with, who I did business with. I would find myself at times in places where I felt like I was being taken advantage of. And I say that with as much humility as possible, but I didn't see it coming. I didn't realize it was happening. And there may be people in this room right now that are like, oh, I love helping. Helping's fantastic, but helping takes time. Have you ever helped someone? You're like, well, that didn't really work out the way I thought it would. Because not because you want something back, it's because it's just part of your DNA. What was wonderful about this book called Give and Take by Adam Grant, which I was asked to read prior to a 5th interview. They really put me through the ringer. And Adam Grant states that there is a level of thought in who you do business with. Are you going to do business with a taker? Are you going to do business with a giver or a matcher? And that really helped unlock who was I going to pick to be on our little pirate ship to take on the world of media. And I found Charlie. One of the greatest things that a business school does is talk to your customers. So at the Reagan building, Maryland either has or still had a campus. And we met all these podcasters. And there was this wonderful, at that point, I was younger, so he looked like a dad to me because he was just like, there's this dad in the back that really knows about podcasting. I mean, who am I to say? There's guys that are 37 that are dads. Like, I just wasn't a dad. So he just, really nice guy, walked back there and I said, how do you know so much about this? He's like, I have been listening to your podcast, but also I have been podcasting for 10 years. And I was able to reach back into the world of broadcasting and remember the givers that I worked with. So we rounded up like this ragtag group of like 5, 6, and then like 4 interns. So a total of 8 people. And we were doing the work of 30. And when I tell you, well, are you concerned about free cash flow? Those were concerning days where you're like, I am taking all these people on and we're going to build something. And I swear, even though your parents think you're crazy, follow us along. We're going to take you and we're going to take the island. And, I did something very, I think, it's just non-traditional. I asked each one of these young individuals, I said, where do you want to be in 3 years? And where would you like to be salary-wise? This is dangerous. Do not do this. But at that time, it worked. And they gave me a number. And we negotiated that number a little bit. And I said, okay, in 3 years, if you follow us, we will get you to that number. Then we honored our word. We were lucky. We were first to market. We pushed. And that's how you choose. So you asked me how to choose. I went back to the givers in my life from the world of broadcasting and some of the interns that I knew were hard workers and that were givers. And that's how we built this exponential, now full media firm. But those were the early days. And like when you're building it, it is the most fun. Even when your head's up in the ceiling and tile and you're running cable because you're not going to hire an engineer because that's going to cost more money. I don't miss those days. But for those of you that are younger and thinking of building what you're going to build, enjoy that time. Because when you get still fun now, it's a different type of fun. But yes, that you pick the right people, the book, the Smith School, the process, what I learned unlocked this level of not just confidence, but sophistication to address how can we execute what some felt was impossible, I always thought was possible with the right people.
Naren?
Oh, that was nice. Thank you. So when you're starting something out, when I was 23 years ago, you're always convincing, like every day you're trying to convince somebody about the merits of what you're doing. And for me, that first conversation was with my parents. And here I was, a successful lawyer. And I said, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to stop being a successful lawyer. I'm going to publish a children's book. Imagine how that went over. It's not great. And so, yeah, you have that conversation with your parents, and they begrudgingly sort of support you. And then you got to have conversations with places like Barnes and Noble, places like distributors, authors, and you're putting forth a value proposition that hasn't been put forth before, a new segment in publishing. So you get a lot of haters. You just can't let that become your narrative. If you've got conviction, you just keep going. And it's never easy, right? I'm a sucker for a good entrepreneurship story. And I love hearing that. And so for us, it wasn't easy. I tell people all the time, I'm an overnight success that took 23 years to get there, right? And I'll give you a quick anecdote that really backs that up. It was about year 7 or 8. We had just hit the first year of $1 million of sales. We had 40% of our sales tied up with one distributor. And I knew, so, it was like $400,000 with one distributor. And I knew that PO said net 90 end of month. And I knew that end of month was end of December one year. And I walked by my bookkeeper's desk and I said, hey, call them. And she called them and she said, she didn't understand what it meant, but I sure did. She said, oh, you filed for bankruptcy. And so that first year where we, kind of made it, 35-40% of our revenue was tied up in bankruptcy court. So, you get knocked down, and there's been, probably stories like that for you and a lot of people in here who have been entrepreneurs. But there's something that says, you believe in what you're building and you just keep going.
So that conviction, that calling, is the one that allows you to truly build. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you've got enough people that are aligned with you on that common objective that can bring in the complementary capabilities that you need in order to develop.
And if I can say one more thing, I didn't know anything about publishing at all. And so I knew what I needed were people who had publishing experience. So the first thing I did is I went to the Simon & Schuster's of the world. I went to New York, I went to agents. And as we grew and we had the ability to grow our team, that's where I wanted to go hire. People that had industry knowledge that I didn't, but what I had is the entrepreneurial spirit.
So let me push a little bit on that. So there were a lot of people with industry experience, but you also talked about the fact that there were some haters. Yeah. So among the people with industry experience, probably the ones that are doing very well, thank you, in traditional publishing, how did you choose the ones that had the experience but also wanted to leave traditional publishing? And how did they choose you?
Yeah. So one of the things I did is I wanted people with a little bit of experience, enough to see what they liked and what they didn't like about traditional publishing. And then I wanted to paint a picture of how we're doing it differently. And so I think you'd have to ask them what they saw in me. But I think if you did, what they might say is somebody that was really eager to take on the establishment. And, I still have that fire. And that becomes evident when you talk to Oscar. I mean, you hear it.
But it's also about service, right?
Yeah.
In the way that we take care of our clients. Like, we're still in the service business. Like, that's like you find the right people and you remind them that, like, we might be on this side of the, but you are our customers. And it's so easy to forget that. And I kid you not, like, sometimes you get to a space where you're like, well, we've got, all these big names. And I had the pleasure of speaking to going to the annual NBA league meetings and speaking to all 30 teams and explaining to them the power, because they're working desperately to get some market share back within media. This is just this past summer. So you get off a stage like that. Yes, you feel great about yourself, and you're talking to the Lakers team, and you're like, this is a dream come true. And then you get a call from a client that, has been with you for 10 years. So you look at that phone, and then you look at the Suns table that you're about to go and sit, Phoenix Suns, and have, and you have to decide, like, are you committed to, you commit. So you walk out, you take the call, you're thoughtful, you come back, and then you take that meeting, it wasn't an opportunity cost, but it's a reminder of yes, it takes your people, right? But it also takes those early customers that took that leap. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And one clarifying comment, I didn't get exclusively people with the big house experience. I wanted a mix, but I didn't know anything about it, putting a book together. I needed like nuts and bolts. And so that's where initially, and then now, I mean, today we have 40 full-time people. And so I've got a nice mix.
May I ask you a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
I love that. They're having a conversation here. Yeah.
When the Barnes and Nobles of the world were transitioning out of the brick and mortars, we were going through like this revolution. How did you talk to your team and say, like, this is a good or bad? Like, how did you equate that moment? Now they're back. They just reopened in Georgetown and across the country. But when there was a cycle with that, you were losing this mechanism to sell. Was that ever effective, or you were just going direct to consumer online?
No. Direct to consumer is a piece of what we do, and a growing piece. But when that started happening, I chalked that up as sign that the publishing establishment was changing, and it was creating a lane for folks like us, right? Who could be creative, who could go direct to consumer. And I'll give you one example since you mentioned the NBA. We published Chris Webber's autobiography, and Chris Webber's a Hall of Fame basketball player, and he's one of the Fab Five from Michigan. Students too young to remember the Fab Five, I know, but you do.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what he had that others that we covet is he had direct access to his readers, right? And so he could post about his book. He's got 2 million followers, and it just became an easier way for him to reach his readers, his fans, than having to sell, directly through Barnes & Noble, which we are now. But his rollout included direct to consumer first, and then we went to a broader market. So it didn't hurt us as much as the big houses who their only way was to get on the shelves of Barnes & Noble or rely on Amazon.
And this actually segues very nicely to the second part, which is now let's talk about the disruption that each of us saw in the mainstream models that were there, right? So as you reflect back on the last 15, 20 years of your journey of being that disruptive wave, what do you see has fundamentally been transformed from the industries that you first saw problems with to where you are now, thanks to all of the things that you guys and the other first movers have done?
Yes. So in the world of books, it was binary. You either publish traditionally or you self-published. And now there are all varieties of publishing. There are publishers that only do audiobooks. There are publishers that only do ebooks. There are genre-based publishers. I think all of content, the more you can niche down, the better, because you can find the people that want to consume your content, right? And that's an opportunity that just didn't exist before.
The way the content's consumed, it's accepted at such a broad level that the competition is actually increased. We build television shows, we build podcasts that look like television shows, but now are on television. But now you can take television shows and put them on podcasts. So it works both ways. The disruption really is competition, which we welcome. And it's easy to say when you have this first mover advantage that you've been able to continue to build on. But realistically, we're still talking about the same math. You build the content, you put the content at the top of your content funnel, and from the funnel, we build socials, your blogs, your newsletter. So one of my favorite parts of this job is sitting at a large conference room when everybody has to come in on that Wednesday now. We meet downtown and we ask the CMO who's in charge of your social or who's in charge of X, Y, and Z. And I'm able to let them know that we aren't just going to help them execute at a higher level with their roles and responsibilities, but we will give them assets from this one capture across the board to support their mission. And look, we work not just with entertainers. A big part of our work is built around politics and both sides. We don't publish them for various reasons. We have to be apolitical. But I guess what has really changed is the business of television and radio, but the business of influence, it just continues to grow. And I'm under some very strict NDAs at times, and sometimes we send this over to our attorneys. They're like, you can never speak about this. And you have to be able to really understand that you're part of a machine. And what I love from the work we can talk about is that there are young creators coming in and saying, I'm thinking of doing this. What is it going to take to do? And I often say to them, even if they're independently funded or wealthy, I said, here's a link for everything you need to build a podcast. If you can create this podcast and do 1 episode a week for 3 months, then come back to us, because it's work. It's work. You don't realize how many TikTok stars I've received a call from and said, I need a long format show. Why do they need a long format show? They need a long format show because you have a longer period of time to have advertisers put dynamic ads into the long format, because the short format makes you just so much money, but you can make more money if you have a long format show. And it's difficult to do. It's not easy. You need a team, especially to compete these days. And some of them succeed and others are like, hey, thank you for not, charging me whatever we charge. I bought all that equipment. I've used it once. That's what's really changed. The competition has gotten fierce. Everybody wants to get in the game, and the vetting has gotten more granular.
So I want to come back to that as we go into the next aspect of what's next. But one of the themes that I think I heard both of you say is that the traditional models of both broadcast TV as well as traditional publishing was really about having a controlled access to cater to what would be considered the masses or the preferences that were common across individual people. And what both hybrid publishing as well as podcasting is doing is allowing you to really not only address the long tail of the distribution, but also the individual niche preferences within the readers as well as the watchers. Am I getting that right? That has been a fundamental disruption.
I think there's a premium on really understanding your target market, and that sounds quite basic. But one of the first conversations I have with authors is, who's really going to care? And if I ever hear somebody say everyone's going to care, I will lose my mind, because nobody's going to care. And I tell them that, and you have to make them care, but you also have to have an idea of who your target market is. And here's a great example. Mel Robbins is on our board of directors. What makes Mel incredible? Many things make her incredible, but she's laser focused on who her target market is. She speaks to, I mean, she can clarify this even better than I can. She speaks to women between 25 and 54, right?
That have buying power.
That have a household income of $200,000, right? And she knows that, and she puts content on that speaks directly to them. She doesn't care about the sports fan that's 50, 40 years old.
No, it's not her demo.
Yeah, that's not her. Yeah. So being laser focused on target market is something that the consumers demand, and we've got to really respect that.
She's also, and you may not gauge this or this unconsciously, the level of discerning taste that you all have to realize, and excuse my French, what bullshit is and what really authentic messaging is so, you're so much further along than people were 10, 15 years ago. You'll know if somebody's really into that subject matter or that topic or what they're the work shows, what they've done in their background, the 25 years that you like, that shows your enthusiasm, that work. But then when you hear someone talking about it, you can see that right away. You can hear it. And Mel is great because she walks the walk, she talks the talk. But you're right. Like, there are different shows with different demographics. I know that certain shows can sell Sleep Number beds because they have a $250,000 household income. And if they're going to buy a $5,000 to $10,000 bed, that's the type of show they want to be on. So it comes to the data, but also, is the audience responding to the host?
Okay. So this is going to actually get me to ask the audience this question, right? Participation time. How many of you, particularly the young students here, read books today? Actually read books?
But read and not just listen. It's okay. I listen to them.
Okay.
You guys are making me feel very good. Thanks.
Okay. That's actually what I thought, because my challenge to you, Naren, is nobody reads books.
Yeah. So here's what I know. Physical book sales as a percentage of book sales is going up. The actual physical form, hardcover. Ebooks have flatlined. Audiobooks have gone up. And so, people are reading. And I think that in an era of short form content, the book is still a substantive work. If you're a thought leader, it shows mastery of a subject matter. It's still a moment in time where you can get somebody to pay attention, to cover you as the author and to cover the launch. You can't get that with a TikTok or a YouTube or a social media post or a LinkedIn post or even an op-ed, right? I'll give you a good example. There's probably 1,000 people that will post about the topic of innovation every day on LinkedIn, right? We've published a book we've done 2 innovation books, and that is what separates those posting on LinkedIn on the topic of innovation versus somebody that puts 60,000 words into a book about innovation. It is the ultimate long form content flex that very few people can do. It's hard work writing a book. And if you can do it and do a good job at it, have some good ideas, have it be supported with research, tell a story, like very few people can do that still.
Same challenge to you, Oscar. I mean, great answer.
Yes.
Which makes me feel good about the fact that you are going to be the publisher of my book. But Oscar, respond. You guys in podcasting, you're old school. You're old. The new generation is exactly the short form, easy content build, social influencers. Podcasting is going the way of old TV broadcasting.
That's actually a great question, not just because I have had that conversation, not with creators, but with my own family members, where they're always trying to figure, we're very competitive and supportive, but they're always like, the fad's gonna run. And I said, we're building, we call them podcasts, but that's just a distribution platform. We're building radio and television shows. Some people just don't realize that. Now, really, television shows, because Apple just announced less than 45 days ago that they're taking video. So you will be watching shows, whether you like it or not, within the next few years. And you can choose the audio side, but you will be watching most of them. What I say to people that it's an unfair question to me now, because I asked them, what their favorite news network is. And they gave me the network. I said, do you ever realize that they have podcast mics in front of them and lavaliers? They never had podcast mics in these little round tables. It doesn't matter which network is your preference. Now they do. Drives me nuts because I know they're not on or there's no XLR plugged into the back. But because they would sound a little better, but it's the new media. It actually adds a level. It's done to give you this, to the viewer, a level of authenticity that you're just a fly on the wall. You're watching. This is not a big broadcast. And I still believe there's a place for the big broadcasts. We actually have, with our partnership of Ventana Productions and They've been around for 30 years. They have sound stages. You will see a clip here. Happy to say that Rajshree's Realms will be released this year. It's Rajshree's podcast. And we filmed a pilot episode. And you will see that studio is one of the best-in-class studios on the East Coast. We're shooting podcasts on sound stages with floor-to-ceiling Mandalorian wall LED, like Hollywood productions. That's the future. It's happening in front of us. So it's not as hard of a challenge now because of what broadcasting is doing, but it was before.
And one of the other things that I just want to fill in the blanks to the responses for why you're not so worried about your business model going the obsolete way as the other models have is that, first off, from what I heard you say, Naren, is that the book is a core part of a whole set of assets that thought leaders, doers want to have. And so part of the business model here is, as you were talking about this person, he may have only sold 5,000 books. But what that enables him to do, this is very similar to what, people like Taylor Swift do, where the actual songs are very a small part of their entire business model of how they're going to monetize it. It's all of the other things that go along with it. And your point too about a longer podcast allows you to figure out alternative ways of capturing value, making money, that short form ones actually limit you, but they don't need to be substitutes. They can actually be complements to each other.
And even further, you just follow the money. A CPM, a cost per million impression, just advertising wise. Spotify, it will pay you more per ad insertion on the video side than they ever will right now on the audio side. So the creators are going where the dollars are. It costs more for the creator to do video. It takes more time. You can't just edit around a flub. So they know that, but they're also pushing, you will be paid more for this content. And that's a market force that you can't deny. So yeah, the influencer will always have a place, and it's part of a broader market dynamic. And there are times where, we're not just building podcasts, we're working with partners to say, what is your overall goal for your brand, your organization, your election? Like, what are you looking to build? And we are in a room with other partners with certain skill sets that allow for that.
And so again, one of the themes that I'm hearing from both of you is that not only did you build early on in your career when you saw an unmet need or felt an unmet need yourself, you've continued to build and adapt as you've gone along to other generations, other business opportunities, other business models. So let's talk a little bit more about what's next. Everybody talks about how AI is taking up jobs, it's going to disrupt everything, and there might be other technologies. So both of you have, in fact, leveraged these technologies and complemented your expertise or built new expertises if necessary. How do you see yourself thinking about the future, and how are you seeing yourself leveraging or worrying about new technologies, new business models coming, and rather than be disrupted, you're going to be part of this continuing disruption? So Naren?
Yeah, so AI is, it's a big industry topic, obviously, in all industries, but definitely in publishing. And there's a couple of different perspectives to look at this. Number one, from the writer-creator's perspective, right? And so what I would tell you is, if you're a writer and you're not using AI as a tool, you're missing out. You're just missing out. If you're not using it as a tool on the front end, research, and as a tool on the back end to refine and to proofread and to edit, you're not as efficient as you can and should be.
I have fights with ChatGPT. Do you know that?
You're not alone.
Yeah. And I think I'm better off because of it.
Yeah, that's right. But where we get into problems in the world of publishing is when AI is writing the book. And so there have been a couple instances that have been pretty high profile recently where publishers had to pull books because it was clear that it was AI written. And these were large publishing houses, right? And so what I liken it to is pick a topic. You can pick a topic and learn about a topic by going to Wikipedia. And you get nice surface level facts, you get exceptions, you get rules, you know, this and that. But what you don't get, that you get in a book, is you get what's in your heart, what's in your head, your experience, how you felt going through something. And that is the big difference that, at least in my lifetime, like, I don't think AI is going to be able to capture that. And if it does, then you know what, I'll stand corrected. But that is the one thing that separates a book that is conceived by humans, written by humans, as opposed to Gemini, email, click.
Yeah. If I can, just for the room, show of hands, if you're scared of AI. It's fair. Like, we should be. The real question is it a flight or flight response? You have to choose to fight. What do I mean by fight? I mean by adopting, leveraging, from a company perspective. The worst thing I see certain leaders do, and it's not my place to tell them to do otherwise, is say you have to start, here's a ChatGPT account. Figure it out. No, you have to train, you have to speak to your team, you have to allow them, you have to give them the tools, not just the stipend for the model. You have to give them the compute for their particular roles. If they're working on a 2011 MacBook Air, they're not going to have the compute. They won't be able to access some of these. So as owners and leaders, you have to think about, Charlie and I, we've got a guy on a desk in one of our offices. His name's Howard. It's one of these new Claude bots that we're building, so we can understand at a higher level how to distribute the compute to our team. Howard doesn't get lonely, right, Charlie? We always wonder because we leave and he's still working. But the real takeaway is this: is it's not a matter of, is AI going to take my job? It's a matter if you're going to involve AI in your job. Because if you don't, the cold reality is this: you will be left behind. And I don't say that with any, bluster. These are just facts. Lean in, fight, use your skill set, lean in, learn the models. I had a gentleman ask me the other day, what's the hardest part of your job? The hardest part of all our jobs is to look around the corner. This is a megaphone that the entire world is telling us this is what's happening around the corner. It's here. And now it's our job to ensure the survival, create efficiencies, keep the people. I've got a wonderful DP. His name is Rich Joy. He's fantastic. He's up there, and I'm just mentioning his name to the world. And I have conversations with him in our common area, and I don't know if he likes AI. Do
you like AI, Rich?
It has its place.
It has its place. And what I know is AI will never make a client look and feel and get the confidence they need when they're in the field with Rich or when they're talking. It will never be able to do that. We're in the services business. But as Rich and our team at Podville and Ventana they're soon finding out, they will have the tools, they will have the compute, they will have the gear to compete on a higher level. But that's the key, and our responsibility is to ensure that we're around for another 30 years.
A lot of the early research that I've done on this in a paper that I published with machine learning, or in 2020 was when I published it, and was based on data on machine learning. In as much as if you think about AI and leave it just by itself, it actually underperforms a person that is not using these tools. But when you complement it with human expertise, that's the value. And so part of what I would love for us to think about, and maybe Oscar, I'll leave with you there, is you talked about leaning in and fighting it as if it was an either or. Again, it's you versus AI. But give us examples of how you're actually leveraging AI into the podcasting world as a technology, similar to when you talked about the download capabilities needed to improve and then how you leaned into that. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Great. To clarify, fight, I mean don't fight the models. Fight your urge to stay away from them and lean away from the technology.
Fair.
And on our end, what I love about what we're doing is, you know what, I'd rather show you.
Okay.
So Rajshree's Realms, before you play the clip, typically would find a certain audience. And what you're about to see is the latest, as of yesterday, model that will allow for Rajshree's Realms to be global. What do I mean? I mean, we can translate
Let's show it.
Fair enough.
How do you see leveraging it in Podville Media moving forward?
The next 10 years of what you see today will look vastly different.
Oh boy.
¿Cómo ves aprovecharlo en Podville Media de cara al futuro?
Los próximos 10 años de lo que ves hoy serán radicalmente diferentes.
Madre mía.
你认为未来在 Podville Media 如何利用它？
你今天所看到的未来10年将会有天壤之别。
Ай, я ну.
Как вы планируете использовать это в Podville Media в будущем?
Следующие 10 лет будут выглядеть совершенно иначе по сравнению с тем, что вы видите сегодня.
Åh bоже.
Hvordan ser du, at vi kan udnytte det i Podville Media fremadrettet?
De næste 10 år af det, du ser i dag, vil se meget anderledes ud.
Åh dreng.
Comment envisagez-vous de l'exploiter chez Podville Media à l'avenir?
Les 10 prochaines années seront radicalement différentes de ce que vous voyez aujourd'hui.
Oh là là.
كيف تشوف الاستفادة منها في Podville Media في المستقبل؟
ال10 سنوات القادمة مما تراه اليوم ستبدو مختلفة تماما.
يا إلهي.
So, the amount of compute that
And the lip sync was amazing.
we're talking about.
By the way, I do not speak all of those languages for the record.
What really gets you is the voice, the tone, the emotion. So much so that those of you that are fluent speakers, because we had to vet all of these, there's certain aspects of a conversation, or even a sentence, that you would say in reverse in certain languages. And the model allows you, it'll flip the conversation. So you're saying the same thing. So it's not word for word. It is changing the conversation. And this is as bad as it'll ever get. So it's going to get better. It can be daunting, but it could also take over an audience that you never thought about before, where you can have that level of reach. So we're not cloning you, not yet. But not yet. But I think this is a fair estimation to say, like in publishing, there is an audience around the world globally. But for example, Mr. Beast, he was one of the first to translate all his shows to Spanish. And the yield from that market in Latin America for what he was building, this is before this technology, and he was spending like $60,000 an episode, early days, turned into $150,000, $200,000 to get it right. These models allow all of us to compete now because the cost goes down, the opportunities are there,
And the speed goes up.
and the speed goes up.
Yeah.
If we can do this at our shop for our clients, these conversations, these models really came out of our MBA conversation. Some MBA teams have certain followings in certain regions around the world. For example, the Houston Rockets, they have a fantastic following in Beijing and China. They're looking at using this type of technology to bring that audience further into their ecosystem. We have the San Antonio Spurs. How do the Spurs talk to their Latino community? So at a greater level. Now, don't get me wrong, this technology could also be used for evil. So it cuts both ways. But for our clients, we believe that we can expand their brand and their voice globally.
Naren?
Yeah, that was a fantastic display. Likewise, in the world of books, with one button, you can translate your book into, you pick the language. So now, instead of publishing English and then getting a translator, publishing in Japanese or Korean, it's instant. And so that's one of the examples along these lines that is happening in real time. And the foreign rights business of our industry has been changed almost overnight.
So one of the things, just to add on to yours and then putting in some closing remarks here then, is, we are all worried about what's around the corner, because what's around the corner is still being observed from where we are and what's familiar. But across technologies, time after time after time, there are jobs that were created that the people at that point in time couldn't even imagine would exist into the future, right? And so this goes back to the old adage of Luddites that destroyed cotton spinning mills because it was going to destroy their job. The white tunic ship that you see in most photographs of ancient Greece and so on, today, if you were to use that same technology to create a t-shirt, it would cost $5,000. Just to put that in perspective, using that old technology, going back in time. Another way to think about it, around the 1980s, when ATMs first came around, tellers were so afraid that they were going to lose their job. And Mike and I have talked about this in terms of the financial system too. But today, if all of the US population was employed as bank tellers, we would not be able to process even 10 or 15% of the financial transactions that we do today. The entire population. So, and of course, we don't think about secretaries and tellers anymore, even though at that time it was a big thing. So who knows? 15, 20 years down the line, your kids, the next generation of students, are going to look back at us and say, wow, you guys did those jobs? Really? With that technology? Ew.
You drove a car? I can't believe you're driving a car.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing, though, that I'm really appreciative of is the fact that, we always celebrate disruption. That's an outcome. We also celebrate the unicorns, right? The big entrepreneurs, the big celebrities, the billion-dollar whatever unicorns and stuff. But one of the things that I'm finding, and this is research that is showing more and more, is this mighty middle of people who are people like you and I, like Oscar, like Naren, and all of you into the future. Maybe 15, 20 years down the line, one of you will be here talking about how you started to build things from where you were and then ended up disrupting whatever vertical of industry that you were thinking about. But you didn't start dreaming and thinking again that I'm going to destroy things. You're always going to start with saying, what problem can I solve? How can I create value? How can I create meaning for myself and also impact for others? So as you're thinking about what you want your careers to be, think about building first. Think about creatively constructing. The destruction, if it happens, is a secondary consequence. If you have that mindset, you'll make sure that you're the one that's constantly adapting, constantly renewing yourself, and hence not being disrupted, but being part of the disruptive wave. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you.
Welcome.